Here we are at the top of the hour, and I would like to welcome everybody to session 4 of Christmas in the Fall. Once again, I want to welcome you for another session where we're going to learn two different Christmas tunes, both traditional in nature, and one of them is a more of an easy approach, and then the second one's got a bit more of a challenge to it. Although both of our tunes this week have got a fair amount of technical things that we need to look at. So let's kick things off by taking a look at our first tune, Silent Night. This is a great tune with a great story behind it. And I don't know all of the particulars right off the top of my head, but I do know that in Germany at one point in time, one Christmas Eve, they were going to do a presentation, and the organ broke down, and there was nobody that could fix it. And they had a Christmas program to put on, and so they asked a guy who was a guitar player to see if he could just put something together and keep it simple, use 3 chords and a simple melody that people would immediately begin to sing. And he went into the other room and he came up with Stille Nacht, which of course means silent night. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful story behind one of the most loved and beautiful Christmas songs of all time. So go ahead and get that out if you've got it printed, or maybe if you've got it on your computer screen where you can take a look at it. It's not going to be as important because much like I was teaching the 12 Days of Christmas in different pieces so that you can easily just recall that piece and play it in order, I kind of want to do the same thing with Silent Night because the arrangement that I've given you is very much a selective picking piece. But I don't want you to think about playing this arrangement. I want you to know wholeheartedly and without any doubt what the melody of Silent Night is, what the accompanying chords are, and how you can pull harmony out of those chords. And once you get that, you don't even really have to pay that much attention to the arrangement, although I will play this version of it. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to share the screen and show the music so we can do our walkthrough. All right. So I always like to tell people, this might have been your first session with us for this month, but I always like to tell my students that whenever you're looking at a piece of tablature that you didn't compose or arrange yourself, it's always a good idea to take a look, a nice hard look at every aspect of it before you actually begin to play it. We all get very excited and we all want to jump right in and start sight reading through a piece. But by taking a thoughtful approach, by identifying particular areas that might give us some difficulty, assessing the situation and trying to figure out some alternative motions that we might be able to use, the first time we play it will be a lot more successful and a lot more smooth if we kind of take a look at what we can expect to happen throughout the piece. And so there are a number of things that I look at every single time, and the first of these is going to be the very important things at the very beginning. And that's going to be, first of all, our key signature, and our tuning is DAD. It's not written on the tab here, but we are in DAD tuning. And then we've got 2 sharps on the staff for our key signature, F sharp and C sharp. 2 sharps means we're in the key of D. Next to that is our time signature. We are in 3/4 time. That top number is how many beats are in the measure, and that bottom number is what gets the beat, or the note duration that we lock our beats into. And so we use a 4 to denote the quarter note. And so the quarter note is what gets the beat, and we have 3 beats per measure. Okay, so once we do that, the next step is to take a look at the navigation and see if there are any repeats or first and second endings, codas, das signos, other things that help us maneuver through a piece that we don't have to print out 8 or 9 pieces of paper. We can just kind of maneuver through 2 or 3 pieces of paper. So we're looking right now at the first page. No repeat symbols, nothing going on there. We'll go ahead and shift it over. Nothing going on the page 2. And on page 3, nothing. We're just going to play straight through the piece. That's one time through the song. All right, so after we ascertain what the key signature is and what our time signature is and see what navigation we should be aware of, the next step is to go measure by measure and identify anything that doesn't look familiar to us. Now, a lot of this is arpeggios, 8th note arpeggios. So I don't have your typical chord stacks But if you take a look at what's happening inside of a measure, for example, we can take a look at the first measure here. You can see that on the top line, we look at a cumulative of what's happening on each line. On the top line, there's 0. On the middle line, there's 0. On the bottom line, there's 2. So if we were just to play that as a simple chord, we'd have a 0, 0, 2, which would be a D major chord. So if you look over into the next measure, you'll see that the pattern changes. No, actually, the pattern doesn't change at all. So it's a little thing that we're doing. It's like a little lead-in, a little 2-bar lead-in before we get into the melody for the tune. So then we take a look at measure number 3, and the melody comes in. And you can see a couple of things. One is that through most of this, you're really just only playing the melody, you're moving things on the melody string, and you're just kind of picking at the open bass and middle string to provide counterpoint and rhythm association with this melody. Now, like in that downbeat of measure 3, you see a 0 and 4, but nothing on the middle string. Well, of course, if you were to strum that, it would be very difficult to pick the 0 and the 4 by itself. But I actually wrote this as a finger-picking piece, and how you get that, I'll demonstrate it when I get that overhead camera view. But, you get your thumb on the melody string at 4, or your thumb, you're playing the 4, but with your right hand, you got your thumb on the melody string, and I use my middle finger on the bass string, and you can pinch them together and pluck them at the same time. And that sounds both notes at the same time. That's the basic concept of what that is when you see those split notes and nothing happening on the middle. I'll show you a way that you don't have to play it like this once I show you the melody and the movement. So when you get to measure 7, down here, do the same thing we did in the first measure. We'll take a cumulative of what's happening on each string. So 6.5 on the bass string, 7 on the middle string, 8 on the melody string. That's a slant-shaped A major chord. So you get an idea of all we're doing is we're going to take that chord shape and then we're going to kind of pick out of that chord shape the melody and our support for the melody. So all we're doing is moving chords around, but we're not playing all the strings at the same time. We can, and that's your guide to how you would get through the piece. And so what you're doing here is just looking for anything that doesn't resemble a chord. Maybe there's a melody note in there that makes things a little different. We get here to the second page and you'll take a look at the first line here, measure 10, 11, and 12. Here we've got some partial chords happening. Downbeat of measure 10, 0, 5, 4. That's like a D major chord. We're not putting our fingers across all the frets, but that open D on the bass string is going to work just fine with the 5 and the 4 that we've got going on there. So we're just playing a very, very simple harmony along with that. And we won't be changing chords, but we'll be using elements of those different chords, like the downbeat of measure 11, 0, 6, 5. That's actually going to be a G major chord, but we're playing the melody. We're also playing one of the harmony notes for G major. And the D bass is still there, and D is the 5th of G major, and so it still works out. So we're doing an open chord melody as we move through the first part of this. We only close the chord when we go to the A major chord. So you'll see the 6.5, 7, 8. Let me go ahead and take this off. So this whole second page is the middle section of Silent Night. And then we get to the last page, and you'll notice right off the bat in measure number 19 that we get that 6.5, 7, 8 going on again, which means we're going back up to that A major chord. Again, sometimes you don't even have to move your fingers at all. That stuff, that 7 on the middle string, your finger's already covering it, so you're just going to be picking over to provide, once again, counterpoint while it's time to wait for that melody to come back in. And that's always going to be on the bottom string at this point for the most part. Downbeat of measure 20. Here's one of those things I was talking about. 6.5, 7, 10 may give you pause. You may not recognize that as a chord shape per se. What we're doing there is we're playing bass and middle string the same notes we would play in a G major chord. But we're reaching up to the 10th fret to get a high G above the octave on the melody string. So we're still playing a G major chord at that point, but we've just taken that note up an octave. And that's not something we normally do when we're playing the mountain dulcimer in this instance. So if that doesn't look familiar to you, that's what we're doing. And thankfully, it's not a huge stretch to get from that shape, 6.5, 7, 8, to move your thumb up to the 10th fret, because those frets are nice and close together up there. There will be some stretches we'll be talking about in the second tune for sure, and some alternative ways you can get these chords without having to do these crazy stretches. I think that's really the only sort of question that anybody might have about that downbeat of measure 20, what that is. So coming out of measure 19, when we're holding down that A major, when we get to 20, you're still holding it down. You're just going to move your thumb up to catch that 10 for the melody, and then you'll see you're going to walk it down to 8 and 6.5 there on the melody string. Measure 21, we get into another 0, 5, 7. We get into another open D major chord. Measure 22, here's another example of that. 0, 5, 9 might not look familiar to you. We're still doing a D major chord, but we're taking that F sharp and we're taking that up an octave at that point to the 9th fret. So it's still a D major chord, but now we're taking the third of the chord and we're raising it up a fifth, an octave. And that's what's going on there at the downbeat of measure 22. Take note, everybody's favorite chord makes an appearance at measure 24. We couldn't have it good the whole time and play these nice, easy A major slant chords. We had to get at least one big honkin' 1, 2, 4 chord in there, an extended slant chord. That's going to provide us a way of following that melody down as it comes down from the highest point of the tune, down through measure 22, 23, to measure 24 down here. And then we'll be able to land in that A major, 1, 2, 4. We'll be able to pick through it a little bit on that middle string, and then ride 3 and 1 down on the melody string, and then we can let go from there and get into our open drone at measure 25, and then we end the piece. So it's a very basic walkthrough. Now I'm going to teach this a little bit differently than, and honestly, I've not taught this tune. I don't think I've done it on Dulcimerica, and I don't think I've taught it anywhere else. But I'm going to do something a little bit different with it. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing here. I'm going to show you the parts first so you can sort of meditate on a couple of different things. One is the tone, the sound of each one of the notes, and then also looking at the fretboard and seeing where each one of these notes lands. And there are two things that you can do, and you can combine them together. One is you know the tune, and the better you get at learning your intervals, the better you'll get down the road of when you hear that next note in your head, you'll first of all be able to hear the interval. And then second, you can look at your finger on the fretboard and know exactly how far to move your finger and in which direction to get that note. So that comes in play a little bit. But what largely happens also is we're using our visual sense to recognize patterns on the fretboard. So when we play these notes, we recognize at this point I was in a wide space, now a wide space, now I'm using this narrow space. Create these combinations of patterns and lock them together with combinations of melodies and notes. And once we get used to seeing and hearing those intervals and putting them together, stuff like what I'm about to show you becomes very, very easy. So I'm going to go ahead and put the overhead camera up here. All right, so let's start with the essence. This guy was advised to write something very, very simple, melody that was easy to remember for people, and this is certainly one of those. We're going to start at the 4th fret. I'm just going to go ahead and play nice and slow through it. Come to the 8th fret. Down to 6.5, now up to 7. Go to 4. Now up to 5. To 7. Walk down. Jump to 8. Up to 10. back to 8, then 6.5. That's one pattern I want you to think about because it's the widest gaps in between notes that we've got. And once you get that pattern in your head, you'll never have a problem with that. Up to 9. That's one more you want to make sure you stick in your head so you know where you're going. Then back to 7, and this is a big leap as well. 7, 4, 2, back to 4, and then walk 3, 1 down to O. Let me do that again now. I'm going to do noter style. Remember, up to 8. Up to 9. 7, 4, 2. So the first thing that I would do with this is just to learn that. Just to play it and memorize it. And then, and don't play anything else along with it. Just play the melody over and over again. Now, I wanted to do noter style so you weren't confused about which fret I was going to. However, it's going to be a lot easier for you to be smooth on this tune if you use multiple fingers and kind of finger dance your way across the fretboard. So be thoughtful about how many notes up am I going? How many notes down am I going? And how many fingers do I need to do that? And how do I need to use those fingers to get the best results? I'm going to do it again. This time I'm going to use multiple fingers and show you some of the optimal fingers I'm using. And this will change when we start bringing in additional harmonies and other elements. All right, I wanted to do a few little passes through so you'd have a version that you could play along with when you get the video, and also, not have to stop and go back and watch the video again. Have a couple in a row that you can play there. All right, so once you get that under your fingers and once that melody is nice and solid, then we can start having some fun with adding other elements to it. Of course, the most easy thing is going to be the drone. So we can play the whole thing against the drone. I don't know about you, but I think the first time I ever heard a mountain dulcimer, it was that drone, it was that sound that drew me over to the table. And the mountain dulcimer's got a very unique voice. And playing a beautiful song like Silent Night with just the melody and the drone works out beautifully. There's nothing more you need to do to make it really an awesome and captivating performance of a piece of music. Now let's see though what we can do in the way of putting more of an arrangement to it and adding in some harmony. Anybody have any questions on the melody so far? Anything at all about the melody that you'd like to get clarification on, or tips and tricks on maybe how to use multiple fingers? All right, I wanted to make sure. All right, now let's go ahead and take a look at some of this stuff. Now, the chord melody style, the big secret to playing chord melody style is to make sure that the highest pitched note in the chord is your melody note. And so the magic of what happens here is we've got 3 notes in a chord, perfect for the mountain dulcimer with 3 strings, and oftentimes we're playing on the melody string, the melody, and that melody string that we've got is the highest pitched string that we have. So it really sets this up quite perfectly to be a chord melody instrument. So all we're doing basically is we are playing a series of chords with a melody note on the top. And believe it or not, that's what many songwriters aspire to do with their melodies is if you've got an underlying chord, you want to take a melody note that is actually part of the chord and put it on the top of that chord as you move those chords around. It can get a lot more sophisticated than that, obviously, but in this very basic form, that's all we're really doing. It's a chord, 2 notes of a chord supporting a melody, like those old vacuum cleaner beach ball displays at Sears. You know, the vacuum cleaner would be blowing the beach ball, and the beach ball would just be hovering in the air like that. Think about that column of air as our lowest note, the bass note, and that middle string is our middle note. And that melody is that beach ball. It is resting on top of that column of air, being supported by it, showcased by it, and it stands out because it is the highest pitched note, and that frequency is a lot easier to hear than the mids and the low frequencies, and that's why chord melody style works. And we can do other things to make it pop even more, put emphasis on that melody, or pick it or pluck it a certain way. But even if you were just to simply play those chords straight, you would get those melody notes hanging out on the top. So whenever we get to a point where we know the chord is changing, all you have to do when you're doing something like this is follow the melody and then piece in the other 2 notes of the chord that we're going to. So we're starting off in D, which means we can let that D on the bass string and that A on the middle string hang out with the drone. So when we get to 8 up here, it's going to be our first chord change. We're going to go directly to A major. And so we're going to have a 6 1/2, 7, 8. We put those other 2 notes in there, and that matches with our melody note on the 8th fret on the melody string. We're going to hold that A chord for a little while longer while we play that 6 1/2 note, 6 1/2 fret note as we go back to, call this out specifically here, measure number 7. Measure number 8, we're going down to 6 1/2. That's so what I do is I've got my middle finger on the bass string, index finger on the middle string, and thumb on the melody string. And what I do is to get from 8 to 6 1/2, I lift my thumb, but I tuck my ring finger, which is free and hanging out, waiting to be put into the game, and I put it over there on that 6 1/2 fret. If I were to take those fingers off right now, you would see what's going on with my ring finger. It's come in there stealth-like. It slid up right over there onto that 6 1/2 fret. It's a wee bit of finger twister, but if you do it enough times, it'll be a lot easier for you to pull off. And then we can get out of there into our next note and harmony on the middle string for our 0, 5, 7. And then we just this is really interesting about this. the melody goes from the 7th fret, D, down to A at the 4th fret. Well, D and A are part of a D major chord, and D is going to be the chord that we play for those, let me see where I'm at here, for measure 9 and measure 10. But it sounds different because we've moved the melody down, and all we've done is we flipped the chord over. We've inverted the D major chord. Doesn't sound like it because we haven't touched the bass string. It's droning for us, so it's giving us some of that drone feel right there. Then we move into our next melody note. That's a B. So knowing your notes and knowing what's in your chords will help you know when chords are changing. For example, if we know we're in D major, we're playing a melody over D major, and our melody notes are A and F sharp and D, then we pretty much know that we're going to be playing a D major chord. But as soon as we got there to that 8th fret, remember that on the melody string, that's an E. Well, an E is not in D major. What chord do we play that's very, very basic for mountain dulcimer that has an E in it? A major, A, C sharp, and E. So sometimes the note of the melody note will give you a clue when to change the chord, just by nature of it not being a part of the chord that you were just playing. So by nature of that, we're playing this beat note for the melody. And what note or chord do we play that's got a B in it? G major. It's G, B, and D. So that means that we piece that together, typically with which would be a 7, 6, 5. And if we wanted to play that full, we could do that, no problem. But to make this a lot easier to play and keep a little bit of that dulcimer drone in there, we're just playing a partial G major chord, and we're letting the D ring out. Now that D, that's open D, it is part of a G major chord, but we're not changing that note. We're leaving that same way it was when we played the D major, so we have that drone going on there. So that's all we're doing, is we're moving the melody, and usually middle string, just 1 fret up, is going to be the harmony note, or 2 frets down will be the harmony note for some of these chords that we typically play. If we were going to fill in all of these chords, 0, 5, 7, we could turn that into a 4, 5, 7 for our D major. The same thing for our G major. Go all the way across 7, 6, 5. The only chords that we are actually playing and pressing down on all the strings are the A majors, the 6.5, 7, 8. And the 1, 2, 4 at the end. So we're just moving our melody around and just going to put in an additional finger to get that harmony as we go around. Let me play it a next step up, and then I'll kind of show you what I'm doing with this arrangement here. There's that trick again with the ring finger, getting it under there for that 6.5 fret. So there is with our partial harmonies and with the chords that are laid out here in this arrangement. Now let me show you what I'm doing basically, and I don't want you to try and copy this thing note for note because it'll drive you bonkers. But let me show you what I'm doing with it. And to do that, I'm going to go ahead and finger pick my way through Silent Night. And I'll do it a little bit differently and extend it out to give you some more ideas about how you can arrange this tune.
you.